Just look at this here. The scientists at the time, as these data were rolling out, said things like this: the notion of a beginning of the universe is repugnant to me. This is from Arthur Eddington, the man that was the intellectual giant before Einstein. The expanding universe is preposterous, incredible. It leaves me cold. Philip Morrison of MIT, he says, I would like to reject it. Fred Hoyle, he called it a crackpot theory. Fred Hoyle, who named the Big Bang the Big Bang. When Hoyle heard of this idea that the universe came into existence, he said, well, that sounds like a Big Bang. And he was meaning that to be a pejorative term, an insult to the theory. And people heard that and said, actually, that's a very good title for it. That's what we'll call it. So Hoyle never believed in the Big Bang. He called it a crackpot theory. What about Jeffrey Burbidge? He was the head of the journal Science, one of the three big scientific journals. He said, anyone who believes in the Big Bang is getting wrapped up with, quote, evangelical fervor, and they're going to join the, quote, First Church of Christ of the Big Bang. You don't think this has philosophical implications or theological implications? Just ask the men who were there and women who were there when this was being discovered. Even today, this is the consensus view in modern-day cosmology. Stephen Hawking, the great and late agnostic physicist, said this, quote, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Paul Davies, again, he says the Big Bang was not just the origin of space, but the origin of time, too. To repeat, time itself began with the Big Bang. If there was no time or place before the Big Bang for a causative agency to exist, causative agency, that's a fancy way of saying for someone or something to cause this. Of course, if you don't believe in God, then there can be no agency. Anyways, if there's no time or place before the Big Bang for a causative agency to exist, then we can attribute no physical cause to the Big Bang. And he's right about that. There could be no physics without a universe. More recently, Alexander Valankin of Tufts University, he wrote, it is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past, eternal universe. Then more recently, in 2012, he said, quote, all the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning. And again, in 2012, regarding other cosmological theories, other people say, well, what about the oscillating universe or the steady state model or the Hartle-Hawking model? Okay, regarding all of those, Valankin says, quote, none of these scenarios can actually be past eternal. We have no viable models of an eternal universe. The Borde-Guth-Valankin theorem gives reason to believe that such models simply cannot be constructed. In this famous theorem that Borde-Guth and Valankin put together in 2003, they said that any universe that is just expanding at all, okay, that was the only criterion, requires a beginning. Requires a beginning. If it's in a state of expansion, it requires a beginning. And that's a very modest claim to make because that's precisely what we see. And the Borde-Guth-Valankin is still held up to this day. Well, so far what we've studied, in a sense, is theologically neutral. We're just looking at the science and saying, what does the science demonstrate? So far, we haven't tried to interpret these data. Okay? The data, scientific data, are not what are in dispute. It's the interpretation of the data. How do we interpret what we find here? For example, if you had two detectives at a crime scene, they would agree on the forensic data, but they might disagree on the culprit or the person who is responsible. The same thing is true here as well. Who or what best explains these scientific data? Or which worldview can best explain this phenomenon that the universe originated from nothing? Well, here's J.L. Mackey in his book, The Miracle of Theism. This was written in 1982. He's an atheistic philosopher. He writes this. Now, please, stick with me here. Read this for yourself. This is a brilliant man, but read this for yourself. Look at what he says. There is no good reason why a sheer origination of things, not determined by anything, should be unacceptable. Now stop right there. Things originating, why? Not determined by anything. That's not unacceptable, okay? Then he says, whereas the existence of a God, that should be a capital G, with the power to create something out of nothing is acceptable. Now wait right there. You're telling me it's more reasonable to believe that nothing created something rather than something created something. That it's just as reasonable or more reasonable to believe that the universe just burst into existence from nothing rather than believing that God exists. Friends, I don't know what to say. If somebody held a gun to my head and said, you need to believe that something could come from nothing, I could not believe that. I couldn't believe that that is true. It would be easier for me to believe in leprechauns than to believe that the universe came from nothing, that things pop into existence from nothing. What about Quentyn Smith, a professor of philosophy at the University of Western Michigan? He writes, the most reasonable belief is that we came from nothing, by nothing, and for nothing. Nothing created something. Guys, that is more of a miracle than anything I've ever read in the Bible, that's for sure. Whether it's the flood or the multiplication of the fish and the loaves or the parting of the Red Sea, any miracle in the Bible pales in comparison to that statement. If you can believe that, if you can believe that something can come from nothing, you can believe anything. I simply don't know what to tell you. That is metaphysically absurd to think that something can come from nothing. But it gets even worse because that isn't the claim that's being made here. The claim is not that something came from nothing. The claim is that everything came from nothing. Think about that for a moment. The atheistic worldview, the pantheistic worldview, surely the polytheistic worldview, the belief in many miniature gods, these worldviews are in dire straits when they come face to face with the creation of everything. They need to believe that everything came from literally nothing.